Black woman rider overcomes racism and inspires the world. The sound of the roaring engine cut through the silence of the early morning as the sun began to rise over the open road. A figure in a leather jacket, helmet gleaming in the light, sped down the highway, carving her place in a world that wasn't always welcoming. This was Lila, a black woman who had fallen in love with motorcycles as a young girl. Her journey was not just about riding. It was about breaking barriers, challenging stereotypes, and proving to the world that passion has no boundaries. Lila's first memory of motorcycles was when she was 8 years old, sitting on the curb in her small southern town. She watched in awe as a group of bikers rumbled past, their machines shimmering like beasts of freedom. In that moment, she knew she wanted to ride, but wanting something and achieving it are two very different things, especially when you're a young black girl growing up in a community where people often told you what you couldn't do instead of what you could. Her dream wasn't just met with skepticism, it was met with outright dismissal. Teachers, neighbors, even her friends would laugh and say, "Motorcycles, that's not for girls like you." But Lila wasn't the type to let anyone define her. She saved up every penny she earned doing odd jobs, secretly stashing away money for what she called her freedom fund. Her determination, even at such a young age, was like a spark waiting to ignite. But the world outside her dreams was unkind. When she finally bought her first bike, a used, rusty motorcycle that barely ran, her excitement quickly turned into a harsh reality. She was met with stares, whispers, and sometimes open hostility when she showed up at local biker hangouts. Racism wasn't subtle. It was loud, glaring, and relentless. Once, at a gas station, a man sneered at her and said, "Shouldn't you be in the passenger seat, not the driver's?" Lila didn't respond. Instead, she revved her engine and rode off, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and determination. She knew then that her journey wasn't just about riding. It was about proving she belonged. Still, Lila found herself wondering if she'd ever be accepted in a world dominated by people who didn't look like her. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, questioning whether it was worth it. The weight of breaking through barriers felt impossibly heavy. But then, something shifted. Instead of retreating, Lila decided to use the very thing that made her stand out as her source of strength. If the world wasn't ready for a black woman rider, she would make them ready. She started showing up at motorcycle events and rallies, standing tall and fearless. She learned to fix her bike, pouring hours into mastering every nut and bolt. She wanted to be more than just a rider. She wanted to be exceptional. Her skills started to earn her respect, but it was her courage that truly inspired those around her. Even people who initially dismissed her began to take notice of the quiet power she carried with her. She wasn't just riding for herself anymore. She was riding for every little girl who had been told her dreams were too big. But the road ahead wasn't smooth. At one particular event, Lila found herself surrounded by a group of riders who didn't hide their disdain. One man stepped forward, towering over her, and muttered, "This ain't your scene." The tension was palpable, the air thick with unspoken hostility. For a moment, Lila felt the familiar sting of fear creeping in. But instead of backing down, she met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "The road doesn't belong to anyone," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She didn't wait for a response. She put on her helmet, climbed onto her bike, and roared away, leaving them in a cloud of dust. Word of her bravery began to spread, and so did her story. Other riders, both women and men, started reaching out, sharing their own struggles and asking for advice. Lila realized that her journey wasn't just about breaking barriers, it was about creating a path for others to follow. She started organizing rides that brought people together from all walks of life, promoting unity and diversity in the motorcycle community. What began as her personal passion grew into a movement. But even as her influence grew, the challenges didn't disappear. There was one incident that changed everything. Lila was leading a ride through a picturesque mountain pass when she noticed a car tailing her aggressively. The driver was shouting something she couldn't make out, but his intentions were clear. He didn't want her there. What happened next was a moment that would test everything she had worked for, everything she believed in. Her heart raced as the car swerved dangerously close, and for a split second, she thought about pulling over. But something inside her refused to give in. She tightened her grip on the handlebars, focused on the road ahead, and pushed forward. The car eventually backed off, but the experience left her shaken. When she pulled over at the next stop, the riders in her group gathered around her, offering support and solidarity. It was a powerful reminder that while the road could be lonely, she was never truly alone. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Lila looked out at the horizon. She thought about how far she had come, from the little girl on the curb, dreaming of freedom, to the woman who had faced down fear and hatred to carve her own path. Her story was far from over, but one thing was clear: she wasn't just writing for herself anymore. She was writing for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, for every dream that had been dismissed, and for every barrier that needed breaking. What happened next would take her journey to a whole new level, one that would inspire not just writers but people from all walks of life. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories come from those who refuse to give up, no matter how impossible the road ahead may seem. And this is where Lila's story truly begins. What do you think happened next? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep the conversation going because the road to change is one we all ride together. The group ride through the mountains became a memory Lila couldn't shake, not because of the close call with the car, but because of what it revealed. She saw how much power her presence carried, how one person's determination could ripple out and touch others. It wasn't just about the road or the ride anymore. It was about the message she carried with every mile. Still, she couldn't ignore the fear that lingered from that day. The close calls, the hateful stares, the moments of isolation, they weighed heavily on her. No matter how strong she tried to appear, Lila was human after all. But she had also learned something important. Fear was just another hill to climb, and she had climbed plenty before. Her growing presence in the motorcycle community was beginning to turn heads in unexpected places. Social media was buzzing with videos and photos of her leading diverse groups of riders, her confidence shining through every frame. People were drawn to her story, how a Black woman in a world that often tried to box her in had chosen to break free instead. Messages poured in from around the world, from riders and non-riders alike. Some thanked her for giving them courage. Others shared their own struggles, inspired by her refusal to quit. She read every message, often late at night when the world was quiet and her thoughts could roam. It was overwhelming, but it was also fuel. She knew her story was bigger than herself now. But as her influence grew, so did the challenges. One day, Lila received an invitation to join a prestigious motorcycle rally, a cross-country ride attended by some of the most well-known riders in the community. It was an opportunity she couldn't ignore, but it also came with a shadow. She'd heard stories about the rally, stories of exclusivity, unspoken rules, and a long history of keeping outsiders on the sidelines. Lila wasn't sure how she would be received, but something inside her told her she had to go. This was her chance to confront the barriers head-on, to prove that the road truly belonged to everyone. As the rally approached, Lila prepared herself. She made sure her bike was in perfect condition, tuning it meticulously in her garage. Her heart raced every time she thought about the ride. Would she be welcome, or would she face more of the hostility she'd come to know so well? She didn't have an answer, but she knew she couldn't back out. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. When the day finally arrived, Lila rode into the rally's starting point, her engine rumbling beneath her. The scene was as intimidating as she had imagined. Rows of pristine motorcycles, groups of riders laughing and chatting like old friends. As she parked her bike, the conversations seemed to quiet. People turned to look at her, their gazes lingering a little too long. She felt the familiar sting of being out of place, but she held her head high and walked over to register. Her confidence was unshakable on the outside, even as her heart pounded in her chest. The first few days of the rally were a mix of highs and lows. Some riders were welcoming, impressed by her skills and curious about her story. But others kept their distance, their disapproval evident in their body language and hushed conversations. Lila tried to focus on the ride itself, The thrill of the open road, the wind against her face, the sense of freedom that had drawn her to motorcycles in the first place. But the tension was always there, simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't long before the tension boiled over. One evening, after a long day of riding, the group gathered at a roadside diner for dinner. Lila sat at a table by herself, quietly eating her meal, when she overheard a conversation at a nearby table. A group of riders was talking about her, their voices low but not low enough. "She's just trying to make a statement," one of them said, his tone dripping with disdain. "She doesn't belong here." Lila froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. The words stung, but they also lit a fire inside her. She had heard this kind of talk before, but hearing it here, in a place that was supposed to be about camaraderie and the shared love of riding, felt like a betrayal. Lila stood up, her heart pounding. She walked over to the table, her voice steady but firm. "You're right," she said, her eyes meeting theirs. "I am making a statement. I'm making the statement that everyone belongs on this road, no matter where they come from, what they look like, or what they ride. If that bothers you, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." The group fell silent, their eyes avoiding hers. Lila didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out of the diner, her head held high. That moment became a turning point. Word of her confrontation spread through the rally, and while some riders continued to keep their distance, others began to rally around her. They saw her courage, her determination, and the way she refused to let anyone dim her light. By the time the rally reached its final stretch, Lila was no longer riding alone. A group of riders had joined her, their engines roaring in unison as they carved their way through the winding roads. It was a powerful sight, a testament to the fact that change, while slow and difficult, was possible. But the journey wasn't over yet. As the rally approached its final destination, Lila found herself facing the biggest challenge yet. The route included a notoriously difficult stretch of road, a narrow, winding mountain pass known as the Dragon's Tail. It was the kind of road that tested even the most experienced riders, and the thought of navigating it filled her with both excitement and dread. She knew this would be the moment that defined her journey, the moment that would either cement her place in the community or prove her critics right. Lila spent the night before the ride alone, sitting by her bike under the stars. She thought about everything that had brought her to this point, the struggles, the setbacks, the victories. She thought about the people who had doubted her and the people who had supported her. Most of all, she thought about the little girl who had sat on the curb all those years ago, dreaming of freedom. "This is for her," Lila whispered to herself, her voice steady and sure. The next morning, as the group prepared to tackle the Dragon's Tail, the air was thick with anticipation. Riders checked their bikes, tightened their helmets, and exchanged nervous glances. Lila took a deep breath, her hands gripping the handlebars. The road ahead was daunting, but she was ready. This was her moment, her chance to show the world what she was made of. And with the roar of engines and the thrill of the unknown ahead, Lila led the way, her determination burning brighter than ever. What awaited her on that treacherous road would be the ultimate test, and the outcome was anything but certain. The engines roared to life as the riders began their ascent up the Dragon's Tail. The air was crisp and heavy with tension, every curve of the road ahead promising a challenge. Lila's heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't fear. This was adrenaline, the raw excitement of pushing herself to the edge. She leaned into the first turn, her bike moving like an extension of her body. The winding road was unforgiving, with steep drops and blind corners, but Lila stayed focused, her mind and body in perfect sync. As the pack of riders navigated the narrow mountain pass, the camaraderie among them began to shift. Riders who had once kept their distance from Lila now followed her lead, inspired by the confidence and precision in her movements. One of them, a seasoned rider named Jack, pulled up beside her at a brief stop. "You've got some serious skills," he said, tipping his helmet. Lila gave him a nod, her lips curving into a small smile. Compliments were nice, but they weren't what fueled her. She was here to prove something, to herself, to the community, to the world. But as they climbed higher into the mountains, the stakes became even more real. A sudden rainstorm rolled in, slicking the already treacherous road. The curves became sharper, the visibility worse, and the air filled with the metallic hum of nervous engines. Lila's grip on her handlebars tightened, and she slowed her pace, knowing that one wrong move could send her or anyone else tumbling over the edge. She could feel the weight of the riders behind her, trusting her to guide them through. For a moment, she questioned if she was ready for this responsibility. But then she remembered why she had come here in the first place. She wasn't just leading this ride, she was leading a movement. The group reached the most dangerous stretch, a series of tight switchbacks known as the serpent's spine. One of the riders, a younger woman named Mia, lost control on a slippery turn and skidded off the road. Lila's heart dropped as she saw the bike slide into a shallow ditch. Mia pinned underneath. Without hesitation, Lila stopped her bike and ran to help. Several others joined her, lifting the bike off Mia and checking her for injuries. Thankfully, Mia was shaken but unharmed, her gear protecting her from serious harm. "I thought I couldn't do it," Maya said, her voice trembling. "I thought I didn't belong here." Lila placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You do belong," she said firmly. "And you're stronger than you think. Let's finish this ride together." That moment seemed to ignite something in the group. As they pressed on, the riders became a team, looking out for one another, shouting warnings about sharp turns, and cheering each other on. The rain eventually eased, and by the time they reached the summit, the clouds began to part, revealing a breathtaking view of the valley below. The group pulled over to take it in, their bikes lined up like soldiers standing at attention. The tension of the ride melted away, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and unity. Lila removed her helmet, her face damp with sweat and rain, and looked out at the horizon. This was more than a view, it was a victory. Not just for her, but for everyone who had doubted themselves, who had felt out of place, who had been told they didn't belong. The road had tested them, but they had made it through together. As the group descended the mountain, the mood was lighter, the bonds between them stronger. By the time they reached the rally's final stop, Lila was no longer just another rider in the pack. She was someone people looked to for strength, someone who had proven that barriers, whether physical or societal, could be overcome with determination and courage. Riders who had once judged her now shook her hand, their respect earned the hard way. In the weeks that followed, Lila's story spread far beyond the motorcycle community. Videos of her leading the group through the Dragon's Tail went viral, and her message of resilience and inclusion resonated with people around the world. She started receiving invitations to speak at events, not just about riding but about breaking stereotypes and building bridges. Her story wasn't just about motorcycles anymore. It was about humanity, about what we can achieve when we refuse to let fear or prejudice hold us back. Lila continued to ride, but now she did so with a greater purpose. She organized charity rides to support underserved communities, mentored young riders, and worked to make the motorcycle world more inclusive. Her journey wasn't perfect, and challenges still arose, but she faced them with the same determination that had brought her this far. She had learned that the road would always have twists and turns, but what mattered most was how you navigated them. One evening, as she sat in her garage polishing her bike, Lila thought about the little girl she used to be, sitting on the curb and dreaming of the open road. She smiled, knowing that girl would be proud of the woman she had become. Lila had faced the road's challenges head-on and come out stronger, and in doing so, she had inspired countless others to do the same. Because in the end, the road doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to everyone brave enough to ride it.